people have been doing it one way for so long now that there's going to be a little work to rehab the health plan and the program, that they're going to have to go through a little bit of pain or irritation, or nuisance to get there. And it doesn't have to be painful or such a nuisance, but there's going to be things along the, like, you can't do anything these days perfectly. Like, you go through some struggle, to get to the end result where you're looking to get through. And so, I think the same is true with, if the structure of your body breaks down, the structure of your health plan breaks down, it's the same thing. Whereas you got to start with, you repair the structure. And then once you have the structure in place, then you can look to start adding on some things to that.
Welcome to Benefits Broker Boost, the show that gives employee benefits brokers practical strategies to grow, scale, and streamline their business. Presented by Plansight, where innovation meets efficiency in employee benefits. Now, let's dive in.
Welcome back to another episode of Benefits Broker Boost. I'm joined today by Ryan Wiggins. Ryan, thanks for being here.
Hey, happy to be on.
So Ryan has a long background in the benefits space, which we'll get into a little bit. Most recently, since 2022, part of McGriff and then Marsh McLennan through that acquisition, and a producer since 2022. Ryan, you've been in the benefits space for over a decade now. Worked at Cigna, UMR, and now as a consultant. When I talk to people, most of them aren't like, yeah, I knew I was going to be in the insurance industry from the very, very get-go. I think your podcast partner, Cole, is the only one that said, my father was in the industry and I knew I was going to be in the industry from a young age. Everyone else kind of happens into the industry. What was the moment for you when you realized, yeah, this is going to be my career, not just like a temporary job?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, to your comment, when Cole was born, he was selling voluntary benefits, so he's been doing that for a while. But no, I went through a sales academy program with Cigna Healthcare. It was one of those situations where I was in college, University of Missouri grad. I went through their business school, and I knew I wanted to do sales. I was a marketing major. I had a minor. They had a sales program, a minor in sales, a minor in psychology. And I knew I wanted to do sales. I also knew, that's where, the quote unquote, the money is. That's where you get to have a lot of fun in terms of entertaining, which, each year goes by, the entertaining is not quite as fun personally, but, depending on who you're hanging out with, it can be great. But I knew I wanted to go into some type of B2B sales role. And it just so happened that Cigna Healthcare was on campus. Their St. Louis office was recruiting for Cigna Sales Academy, which was a fast track into their sales program. So that's all I knew. I like probably most people you talk to, I couldn't tell you what a deductible or out-of-pocket maximum was, or how health insurance works and all that stuff. But I went through this, for me, it was a year-long program. I was in the 250 employee plus sector of their health plan sales team. And I just did a lot of digging and learning around the underwriting process and how they look at high claims and how do they manage the risk appropriately, and what's the best pharmacy formulary to get a program into, and how do we compete against the other insurance carriers and the other PBMs in the marketplace. And at the time, and I'm sure Cigna may still be this way, but at the time, David Cordini, their CEO, he was all about, for us to solve the problem of healthcare costs inflating like it is, we have to get people healthier. And ultimately, that is the correct message. Like, we have to get our society as a whole healthier. And so I bought in immediately to that messaging, full Kool-Aid. I was trying to preach to all the brokers that I had a chance to work with after my training program about how the only way you can reduce cost is to to get people healthier. And what I realized was, through that process, while the messaging was great, what we were doing wasn't helping anything. It wasn't helping get people to better quality providers. It wasn't helping improve the individual's health. None of those two things were resonating. Employer costs continue to inflate at, triple the amount that standard inflation inflates at. And, after working on the carrier side for 10 years, I realized that, for someone to really make change in this industry, you have to be working directly with employers to help them influence the decisions that they are making. Because, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more, a lot of the biggest challenges for employers is they just don't understand how the system works or the different components that comprise the health insurance premium as a whole. And so, through this 10-year journey, starting with Cigna and then transitioning over to the TPA with United Healthcare's TPA UMR, I really got a good in-depth look as to how we're pricing healthcare and the structures that's being created. When you learn about where all the dead bodies are buried and you understand the messaging that they're speaking to the market versus what's being said internally in terms of how we're trying to manage our business as a publicly traded business, is two very different things. And I owe a lot to Cigna and I owe a lot to United Healthcare just because the education that I received, the time that they put into me, time and money that they invested into me to learn the industry. And, but I just realized that I needed to start working with employers directly if I really wanted to make some real changes to how we do things, because employers don't realize how much power they actually have when it comes to their health plan and benefit packages. And the negotiating levers are real. And so that's a long-winded answer as to say like how I got into this process. But, it was a journey over the last 10 years, and every day continues to be a journey even on the broker side.
Yeah, I love that you latched onto that message of making the population healthier so early, and have kind of carried that through in your decision making to move over to the broker consultant side and help. I see that in a lot of your messaging, helping employers actually help their employees become healthier. And that we share some common interests there, fitness, nutrition, like that is something that if you can carry that as your message through all of this, I think will resonate really well um, with employers as well. Is we have to make the general population healthier. So I love that. So how does that experience with the carrier and third party administrator side, how does that change how you do things on the broker side, right? How does it change the way that you think about solving problems for employers?
Mhm. Well, early on, I realized that I can't sell insurance consulting services or insurance broker services. I mean, if we think about, and let's take a step back for a second here. If we think about the role of the insurance broker slash consultant, me and my partner Cole, we've built a model called the Broker 3.0 model, which is how we advise with our customers nowadays. And when we look at the historical context of the insurance broker, where it started out, the 1.0 version is we are going to procure your benefits and write insurance for you as the business. It was very cut and dry. You had, one person that probably owned an independent agency. Maybe they had an administrator or some type of account manager that worked alongside them to help them just manage the day-to-day business of the account. But it was a very cut and dry process. Then we move into the ages of the ACA, and things changed drastically due to the amount of compliance work that was needing to be done. So a lot of the insurance brokerages had to staff up on things like ERISA attorneys and build out your compliance and your HR consulting practices. And then through that process came lots of NA activity, really leading up until, probably the last year, which is still going on. But, I feel like since Marsh bought McGriff, things have slowed down a little bit in terms of those talks, but I'm sure they'll continue some capacity. But ultimately, consulting firm continued to grow, but it was more focused on we have to build out all these other areas and be the expert for our customers and compliance and HR consulting and all those things. And what has ended up happening through a lot of this through M&A activity is all the brokerages have turned into essentially some type of commodity practice. And we're seeing this in the accounting space. We're seeing this in the banking space where there's no real differentiator outside of the individual relationship that you have with the person that you're talking to right in front of you. And so when Cole and I were kind of thinking about what's the next iteration of the brokerage consulting model, what is that going to look like? We believe that it's going to be independent thought leadership, that people have specialized, they specialize in specific areas. So for Cole and myself, stay focused on the health plan side of things and round that out with some of the things that we're doing around pharmacy and risk management. He really stays dialed into, HR technology, voluntary benefits, or just some of the additional programs that employees may want to latch onto, but the employer doesn't necessarily want to set some type of budget aside for those programs. And through this model, it's really allowed us to stay diligently focused on what we do. So I am not spending time learning about, the contract details on a whole life with long-term care rider attached to it. Do I want to know about that? 100%. Do I want to have a general understanding of what that is? Yes. But I know if I have questions for a customer that come up, that needs to be Cole needs to handle those, or I need to go to Cole or someone on Cole's team to help us manage that product. So I think when you ask me, how has that influenced my brokerage model or my brokerage decision, I am constantly thinking about how do I become better at what I do best and what I'm most passionate about, which is healthcare. So the second part of that question is, how do I advise customers? Well, for me, it's getting back to the basics. And so a lot of what Benefits Are Boring, the brand was started behind, was we have to get away from the status quo nature of our business. But then on top of that, that doesn't just mean we implement 10 different new solutions every year and see which ones work. We have to provide some type of structure. So how I view myself to employers is really an educator on how do we structure a health plan. Because what that's going to do, and it comes up for me as well when I get asked questions from customers, is what happens when you don't know what to do? What do you rely upon at that point in time? And you have to always go back to your structure. So I personally teach a 7-step structure as to how you build out the health plan for their employees, so that when we get questions or we don't know what to do, we go back to the structure and rely upon the structure. And that's been a little bit of a differentiator for me in the marketplace, because when most brokers want to lead with what's the newest innovative product, what's going to catch the CFO or the HR director's attention, I'm going back to where does that fit into our structure and our world that we've created for us on the health plan side. And so that's provided a little bit of a differentiator for me in the marketplace, and really the story that I'm most passionate about telling. So I don't mind sending those emails or picking up the phone to tell that story, even though I know, I might get shut down, because that's what I believe is the process and the way that we have to go moving forward here.
Yeah, I love that. And it's amazing to me how often people have to be called back to that initial structure, right? I've worked with a lot of businesses in doing consulting for them, and we go through this process of putting the goals on paper, and then the business owner undoubtedly gets distracted by a shiny object somewhere along the path, usually frequently, and brings that back. And you have to have those end goals marked down and in stone so that you can say, yeah, that's really interesting. Where does it fit? Right.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah.
I love that you start with that structure, because pulling things back to that structure, if you don't have that, you can go down rabbit holes that are not ultimately getting you to your end goal, that seem fun, seem cool, seem potentially helpful, but they're not in the right place.
Well, and I mean, you mentioned fitness earlier. So let's talk about what does that look like in a real life example outside of benefits or a health plan standpoint? If I am shoulder pressing 135 pounds and all of a sudden I get this bad feeling in my shoulder, the first thing shouldn't be, oh, let me think about what I can add on to that to keep lifting heavier because my shoulder now hurts. How do we repair the structural problem that we have so that we can get to the point where we can push past 135, where now we can start lifting 155, 175, and taking the ball and moving it forward. Sometimes it's going to take a little bit of rehab and a little bit of work to get your body into the shape that it needs to be in so that you can do certain types of movements. And the same is going to be true from your health plan. People have been doing it one way for so long now that there's going to be a little work to rehab the health plan and the program, that they're going to have to go through a little bit of pain or irritation or nuisance to get there. And it doesn't have to be painful or such a nuisance, but there's going to be things along like you can't do anything these days perfectly. Like you have to you go through some struggle to get to the end result where you're looking to get through. And so, I think the same is true with if the structure of your body breaks down, the structure of your health plan breaks down, it's the same. It's the same thing, whereas you got to start with you repair the structure. And then once you have the structure in place, then you can look to start adding on some things to that.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So I've heard you say that I think this was in one of your LinkedIn posts, but that 60% of Americans can't afford an unexpected $1,000 expense. And a lot of health issues exceed that, right? We both know that. How does that stat and stats similar to those shape the way that you plan design with your clients?
Couple things there. So first of all, a lot of what we talk about in terms of, I spend a lot of time talking about the individual employee because I want employers thinking about what is my employee going through, not just like, does our benchmark say that we have a good benefit package? And if we do, okay, awesome. My idea is, why do you want to be a benchmark employer? Like, do you want to grow your business year over year? Is it yes or no? I assume the answer is yes. Like, you want that P&L. You want your profit to grow much quicker than your losses, right? So how do we actually influence your employees so that your health plan improves? So I spend a lot of time focusing on the employee first and foremost. But what I do want to say to that point is, even though I speak to how employers can help the employees, which they absolutely can, we do have more of a societal problem uh, than a individual employer problem. And for uh, the amount of wealth that is in this country, for most of the employees, not for most of the people in this country, not to have $1,000 in their bank account, that is a societal problem at large. Now, let's just table that and we'll set that to the side and we'll talk about the employer role of that. So when we think about building out health plans, a lot of what we did, and because I was like, maybe you can call me like an ACA baby, right? I rolled into the industry right when the ACA was rolling out. And that really accelerated the growth of high deductible health plans, which can be used strategically very well, specifically the health savings account. But what we have to remember about a health savings account is that is not a health plan. It is an investment vehicle. It is an investment vehicle for an individual that has low healthcare expenses, that wants to save for the future. They're looking for ways to eliminate tax exposure, etc. I would say most employers that have implemented a high deductible health plan over the years with an HSA have tried to use that as a vehicle to help lower cost or lower their portion that they're having to pay up front, make their employees responsible for the first $3,000 or $4,000, and then go on. But then there's a potential bigger issue with that, which and I'm just talking about the individual employee here, is okay. So we have the employee owes the first $3,000 or $4,000, which in the grand scheme of things, if something happens to that employee that's considered catastrophic, $3,000 or $4,000 is nothing compared to, or it's nothing compared to, whatever the employer's on the hook for, 40, 50, 100,000, $1 million. It's really nothing in the grand scheme of things. But when we look at that individual employee and they can't pay that $1,000 bill because they don't have anything in their savings account set aside for unexpected expenses, now all of a sudden we work our way through the healthcare funnel, which is okay. They can't pay their bill. So what's going to happen if they can't pay their bill? Well, they're going to get sent to collections. Okay, if they get sent to collections, that could potentially impact their credit. What happens if they don't pay off in collections? They get potentially sent to some type of level of bankruptcy or coerced into bankruptcy or wage garnishment from their employer, which again, we could go down some rabbit holes with those two items alone. But what we're dealing with here is a financial crisis on the employee's behalf. And is that employee going to be a productive employee for you, the employer that's trying to grow his business year over year, if their biggest concern is, how bad is this going to affect my credit score? What is bankruptcy going to mean to me and my kids? I don't have, do I have to hire a lawyer to pay this? I don't have any money to hire a lawyer. What happens? So they're just left in this world, this like unknown vortex of what's to potentially come. And I think you and I know the answer to this question, but how is that employee going to perform at work? Probably not great. It doesn't matter if he's on the line at a steel mill or, working as, an accountant at some small company, whatever the case might be, that employee is probably not going to perform well. And so when we think about how we design our health plans, the big word in our industry is disruption. We don't want to disrupt our employees, which to a certain degree, I totally agree with actually. But we need to be able to provide options to the employees that are willing to be quote unquote disrupted so that they feel confident they can afford a health plan, that they can afford to pay for their health plan. Because I am not a guy that's going to sit back and say that doctors and doctors' offices and facilities don't deserve to get paid for the services that they do. I believe that just like any other business, that they deserve to get paid a rightful amount for the services that they render to the individual. So I do not believe that we should just be like, oh, you get a bill from the hospital, just throw it away, go to collections, just don't pay, don't answer the phone. I just think that's wrong morally, and that's not how I build my compass. I do believe that those companies deserve payment, and I get that people are going to say, oh, they can write it off, and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, is that really the moral obligation that you want to put your employees under, when there are options out there that can serve your employees, and you can still offer whatever the non-disrupted status quo health plan is, but why don't we pair that alongside something that maybe your younger employees want to go to because they don't want to pay the money. Maybe your employees that are nervous about healthcare expenses, or they know they don't have a whole lot of money in the bank if something goes wrong, that they can go to. Give them options. So I'm a big options guy. I want them. I'm not just talking about PPO versus an HSA option. I'm talking about, hey, if we're a larger employer, why are we not offering a reference-based pricing option alongside of our traditional carrier PPO option? Why are we not implementing some type of alternative health plan as another option, and then bake in a network product next to that, so that your employees get to choose how they want to proceed. You get to avoid disruption as a whole, but you as the employer are now doing you're checking the box from a morality standpoint in terms of what I assume your core values are based upon, to get your employees into a more affordable health plan option that they can leverage. And if they don't want to leverage that and they want to pay expensive premiums for the other healthcare plan, or they're willing to spend more on out-of-pocket costs, or whatever the case might be, then they can go for that. But I want to bring options to my employers so that they can provide the flexibility needed for their employees' financial situation.
I think that circles back nicely to what you originally pulled out of Cigna, and latched onto is, how do we make the employee, the end user, the general population more healthy? I don't think most traditional healthcare plans that in companies that I've been part of are designed to do that. I think they're designed to check the boxes. Yeah, we got healthcare covered. So I like that that's the way you're thinking through that, and helping employers you work with think through that. It's a different approach to healthcare, I think, than a lot of people are taking, but it's the approach that covers the population more completely, I believe. So, a lot of what you've talked about and posted about in the last couple of years has been down the vein of self-funding, right? And you work with a lot of larger groups, and self-funding is usually a great option for them. What are the biggest misconceptions that you run into with your clients and employers that you're prospecting into? What are the misconceptions that they have about self-funding, and how do you get past those conversations?
A couple things there, because self-funding is, the employers are going to say it's too risky. That's the first thing that's always going to come out of anybody's mouth. This is probably too risky for us. And they're right to a certain degree. Self-funding can be a risky play if you don't set it up properly. And many employers have been burned. And as we continue down the path of more and more expensive treatments, like what we're seeing with gene therapy treatments that are coming out to market, these employers are going to have to get better about managing catastrophic risk. So when we think about transitioning to self-funding, one, employers have to be taught the foundation of what self-funding, not just self-funding, they have to be taught the foundation of what health insurance is and what encompasses the health insurance policy. If they don't understand the claims bucket, the administrative fees bucket, the reinsurance bucket, and the reserves bucket, they're not going to have a place to even start in understanding transition to self-funding, because you start saying things like, all right, well, you were going to have admin fees with this TPA, and then we're going to have your reinsurance with this carrier, and then, oh, you know what, you're a small group, so we're going to put you in this captive, and we're going to that is just they're not going to know what hit them. So if your customers don't even have a basic understanding of how self-funding works outside of we pay claims as we go, and we're responsible for all of those claims, you're never going to get them to transition to a self-funding model. And this is a battle that I constantly deal with myself. So you have to teach the core concept of the healthcare premium, what makes that up, and how that applies to a fully insured policy versus a self-funded policy. Okay. And then you have to rely upon the structure that I talked about a minute ago. You have to have a simple structure that we're going to lean on no matter what happens. If we get that $1 million claim, what's the structure? What are we going to go back to? What's going to be our gospel for our health plan? And then from there, we have to make sure that we're finding the appropriate solutions to meet the population. So what I mean by that is and I say this about our government all the time, whatever you incent is the behavior you're going to produce. So we need to incent the right behaviors based upon our structure. We need to put in some type of direct primary care. It might be virtual direct primary care, but there needs to be dollars attached to that. $0 primary care, direct primary care. Ideally, you reward employees if you use their services because hopefully that DPC is monitoring all of that stuff better than the health system primary care doctor is going to be, and they can kind of transition the bubble. And then from there, how do we get employees to the best providers? So it's just this. How do we build out a concept and a structure that we're going to rely upon and then teach the employers to do that? It's very difficult. This is like you get into a room and you say, hey, what do you guys know about self-funding? And the CFO is like, look, that we don't have the risk tolerance for something like that. I mean, what are you supposed to do as a broker consultant at that point in time? Be like, well, you're an idiot. No, you have to kind of massage that conversation. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, if it's our client, we don't want to call our HR partners idiots because they do things one way or the other. We want to say, do we think this is the best way that we can do something? Yes or no? If they say yes, and they say there's no other option, okay, you know what? We are at the disposal of their guidance because it's their business. It's not my business. I am there as the consultant, and sometimes you can only do so much as the consultant. But for helping employers with self-funding, you have to, one, have a very detailed background knowledge in how self-funding works from the carrier standpoint. You have to understand how it works and how the carrier or the TPA is thinking about it. And then second, you have to have that structure that I talked about to be able to go back to, because things aren't always going to flow perfectly. Healthcare, like you could have uh, the best health plan ever created, and guess what? You still are going to have one of those horrible years every once in a while. Now, maybe that horrible year for you is health plan claims only went up 10% instead of 35%, right? But still, like if you had that structure in place, that is still a win. And so we have to understand that, healthcare is fluid. There's no perfect answer to it all right now. But if you understand what self-funding is and you can explain that to others and break that down, and then on top of that, build out a structure to help them comprehend how to do it appropriately so that their costs stay relatively neutral year over year, then you'll be in a good position. But it's a difficult conversation. I struggle with it daily. I'm always looking to get better at it. But that's where it has to start. It has to start with the education piece. I firmly believe that.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's helpful in getting the conversation started is the data, right? Is taking the right data to the employer and, hey, here are some potential signals or size statistics that say you'd probably be better off doing self-funding. What are the things that you're looking for in data or in company size, or have you start that conversation with an employer that you're working?
So yes, data is needed and is extremely useful. But if we aren't using the data to accelerate our strategy, then it's pretty worthless. So when I do a review of somebody's health plan, we are looking at the same things that everybody else is. What's their high cost claim spend and what are they dealing with? What are their top 25 drugs and what are they dealing with? What are their MSK issues, your heart issues, all of those things? Because, we know that the top three healthcare disease killers, number one, cancer. Number two is cardiovascular. Do you know what number three is by chance, Adam? Preventable medical mistakes. And so we can have all the data in the world. We can't be in the room when the doctor's performing a surgery or a procedure. We can't be in the room to know what they're talking about with their clinician each year that they're, getting their whatever medication they're on re-upped or, And so, yes, data is critically important these days so that we can help guide and really accelerate our strategy. But data is just data if we don't know how to use it. And generally, I have found that it's fairly pointless. Like you could hire any broker to come into one of my groups that are on a high performance health plan, or I could go into any one of their groups that are maybe on a high performance health plan. And I can say, oh man, your musculoskeletal spend is second highest leading chronic disease, on your list. Well, guess what? Skeletal is the second highest disease on everybody's list. So it's more about understanding each organization's strategy to how they build out and structure their health plan and using that data to accelerate that strategy, which I know is not the question that you wanted answered. But if we're just being honest, and that's just like, you can't do anything with data unless you have put some type of guardrails and strategy around what you actually want to do with that data. And so when I take in the data and I pull some of these factors, what I want to know is, all right, we have uh, 10 high cost claimants. It looks like they were all they're all back surgeries. Like you, the employer, what is your strategy behind your musculoskeletal spend and what your employees are doing when they're reaching out to see these back surgeons or these spine surgeons? That's what I want to know. I want to know how the employer leverages that data, because typically what happens in our business is we show up once a quarter, we deliver the data, we tell them, okay, this is what's going on. We're using this advanced analytics platform, and this is what it's showing from the disease state and, population health and all of this stuff. But what are we doing with that data? Not a whole lot most of the time. And so that's, how do you use that data to advance your strategy or your structure that you've built within the health plan? It always comes back to that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that's a piece that a lot of people a lot of employers are not even looking at, right? What's the process of your employees reaching out to healthcare providers? I've never been asked that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't think that many employers are even aware of that, right? And if there was a better method to get them in front of better doctors, more affordable doctors, people with
Well,
better outcomes that fit the bill,
well,
they wouldn't know.
no, 100%. And like what I want to see is, hey, if we have some type of direct primary care service for a client, how many employees are signed up for that? And then what's the utilization there?
Hmm.
That's a data point that can very easily swing the health plan one way or the other. How many times have your employees used the advocacy service that we put in place? Because I have a customer right now, they're a great customer, single option, high deductible health plan with an HSA. They have a advocacy solution bolted on there, but the percentage of utilization within the advocacy provider is 5%. And year over year, I come back to them and say, what's our strategy for having this solution in place? Like, why? Like, nobody uses it. I mean, less than 5% of your population uses it. Shouldn't we either find something that's going to work for your population or rebuild our structure in terms of how we want to advance what you're currently doing? And so that's just an example of, you can have the right things in place, but but if you but we can see through those data points that it's not advancing the strategy of what we're trying to do year over year. Then we need to rethink how we do that. So that's how I want to leverage data. I don't just need to leverage data to see that your musculoskeletal spends the second leading chronic disease on of course it is. Everybody it is. I bet heart disease is up there as number one. So data becomes very useful when you use it to advance the strategy, not just to review.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. This is a hot topic right now, primarily because Mark Cuban is really vocal about it, but let's go the PBM route. You've got a lot of experience with integrated, non-integrated pharmacy PBM models. For brokers that haven't gone super deep on this, and I've seen a lot of your comments when Mark Cuban posts about this and your posts on your independent LinkedIn page, but for brokers that haven't gone super deep on this yet, where is the biggest money being left on the table in your experience?
People aren't going to like this answer, but it's the real answer. And it's, we aren't monitoring the pharmacy contracts. We will go year over year. We'll have a pharmacy in place. They will bring back to us some type of reconciliation report. The PBM will. But are we having some type of independent contract review and reconciliation done year over year from a third party, whether that's the consulting house's pharmacy practice or some type of third party pharmacy practice, actually review the contract year over year and then make sure that what the PBM is reconciling either matches or that we are reconciling to ensure that their customer are getting the full amount of money back. That's the contract is the biggest exposure piece right now to any employer. Because on paper, when you look at things like rebates, you look at things like discounts, they're very competitive across the board, whether it's a big 3 PBM or big 4 PBM, all the way down to a lot of your local and independent PBMs. So you have to start at the contract piece, because if you look at a PBM contract from 10 years ago compared to now, they have probably quadrupled or 5x'd in size. And I'm talking about just the contract length, moving from a 20-page contract, probably most contracts now are 120 pages. So it's hard to understand what is actually going on behind the scenes, because what we don't realize is there's more to the equation than discounts and rebates. Like, rebates is the hot topic in politics because that's the easiest thing to comprehend. So a politician can walk in and they'd be like, oh, this rebates thing seems pretty fishy to me, because that's like the big eye candy up on the wall. But what we don't understand is when we look at the graph, and there's a couple of people who do a great job with this, when we actually pull back the curtains with what's going on behind the PBM landscape, is the PBM is just one component of the entire piece of the pie. You got pharmacy manufacturers, you got wholesalers, you got pharmacies. You have to round all of that. How are each of those people making their money? And then where is that money flowing? And there are some great graphs on this that I could find anybody that's interested. It is, you will look at this piece of paper graph and be like, I don't even know where to start looking at this thing in terms of where the money is flowing, coming in and out. And so the basic thing that we can do is just make sure that the contract's being administered correctly, which is missed continuously. Making sure that we trust the PBM to say, oh, okay, we missed discounts by 2%, so we owe you this $500,000 check. Okay, maybe that's probably correct, right? But have we actually had that third-party consulting resource that is in contracts every day review what was used and then tally those metrics up? That's the biggest thing that's missing, because the pharmacy game is so much bigger than the PBM itself. That's just one of the spaces, because, the PBM, it's got the rebates, it's got the discounts, it's got their GPO fees, their administrative fees. There are all these different things built into the PBM. Now extrapolate that over the other 4 models and trying to identify where the dollars are flowing in and flowing out of. It's impossible to keep up with. But I guarantee you, I'm trying to learn as much as I can. I'm trying to use tools such as AI to get myself up to speed on where some of the biggest hiccups in pharmacy contracting. Same goes on the health plan side. But that's where you got to start. Are the carriers, whoever you're working with across the board, living up to the contract that your client signed up for?
I think that's definitely the obvious place to start. And your comment about how much longer those contracts have gotten, there's purpose to the messiness of that, and that's where a lot of the money's going. But that's why, like you said, having someone come in that is in those all the time and understands what's going on and where the money's flowing is valuable, because for the most part, it's complex purposefully.
Well, and on the other side of the coin, I've had a friend that I've had this debate with who works for a transparent or a very good PBM, but I've had this debate with them where she was like, okay, fine, you can look at that PBM over there that only has 11 or 12 pages in their contract, but what are they not telling you that they can do that they're leaving out of that contract so that they're not held responsible for if they get caught doing it? So there's 2 sides of the coin there. Like, it doesn't, a long PBM contract doesn't mean it's worse than a short one. I mean, to a certain degree, I feel like the longer the contract is, probably the worse it is, because there's more in there. But there's 2 sides of the coin, and that's why we really have to specialize in how we consult on the pharmacy piece with our customers these days.
Yeah, definitely. Okay,
Yeah.
we're running up on time. I have 2 more questions that I want to ask. One is, building your book of business, right? You're almost 4 years in now, and you've came from the insurance space. So we've interviewed people on the very early end of their career. We've interviewed people on the very late end of their career. And you're in a competitive market. You know, you're in the Dallas Fort Worth area. There's every large agency
Hmm.
has an office in your area, and they're all knocking on the same doors. So talk to me about building your book of business. I want to specifically touch on three things. How do you differentiate yourself when you finally do get their attention? So how do you get their attention in a crowded market? How do you differentiate yourself when you do get their attention? And then how has your personal branding with your LinkedIn content and your podcast helped in building your book of business?
Yeah. So the the days of like cold email and cold phone, it's not dead, but it's a very tough situation to be a part of these days. And so where I am finding most success is telling the story that I tell to individuals that have a voice with the said customer that I want to go after. So I really focus on my centers of influence these days because whether that's fractional CFO firms, lawyers, accounting firms, bankers, my job is, does my story resonate with that individual person? My centers of influence, does it resonate with them? If it resonates with them, why does it resonate with them? And if it does resonate with them and they understand why it resonates with them, will it resonate with your customers or
Mhm.
the people that you work with? And then if it will resonate with your customers and employers, how do we build out a strategy so that we make you look good for your customers that you're serving? Those are the variables that I am trying to follow right now. So really, when I think about my LinkedIn presence, some of the things I'm trying to build around benefits are boring. I want that to be more for people that say, I have to go compete with CBiz on accounting services, but CBiz also has a health insurance or has insurance brokerage arm. So I need to have a solution for that if they're truly wanting something that's all in house. And I can say that this is my in house person that I leverage for health consulting services.
Mm.
So those are the people that I'm trying to get to because I want them to say, hey, this Ryan kid, man, he is passionate about this and he is trying to fix a problem. I don't know if it's the right solution for you, but I really think it'd be worth your time for you to have a cup of coffee with the guy.
Yeah.
That's what I want right there. And I want them to be able to tell, like, I want my centers of influence to be able to tell me like what do you know about me? And at the end of the day, if all they say is, I help get employees to higher quality providers at a lower cost and I help businesses save money, if that's all they can repeat about me, great. Because at least they have something to work off of when they're talking with their CFO partners and their CFO partners, they're doing their audit on the year and their CFO partners are like, God, I can't believe this healthcare keeps going up by 10% or 20% every year. I mean,
Mhm.
how do we even budget, how do we budget and account for this other than just eating the loss every year? That's what I want. And hopefully, I will never use my LinkedIn platform to bash individuals or other employers. But the point is, I believe that we can do things better. I believe that your employees deserve more from you as a business. And I want that messaging to be reflected in what I'm putting out there publicly.
Yeah.
And hopefully people start to grab onto it and maybe it results in business. Now, if there's anybody younger watching this podcast that's new, I'm going to be fully transparent here. I am not like multi-million-dollar producer. So I started with McGriff in October of 22 and I just validated January 1st of 26. So it took me 3 years and basically 3 months to validate and hit my number. So it's not something that happens fast or overnight. The amount of the old adage in sales of the amount of uh trying to think of the right way to put this, but the activity levels does not equal results in today's world. But what I think is really going to continue to build, and it already has over the last 10 years, is we are in an attention-seeking society. So you have to have some level of attention on you so that people know that you're even there to begin with. Because when they're there and they actually start considering buying, we have to remember that only 3% of the entire landscape of employers that you're going after is ready to buy like right now. So
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, I guess you could think of it as every $100 dials is 3 potential people that could buy from me. But the reality is we have to have attention on ourselves. And what having attention on ourselves does allows us to build a layer of trust with an audience. And then once you have trust with an audience and they like you, then once they start to like you a little bit and they fully trust you, I said that backwards. Once you get their attention and they like you, they start to like you and like your content and what you're putting out there, then they start to trust you time and time again if they're seeing your stuff. Once you have their trust, you better believe that they're probably going to be coming to you for some type of buying decision when the time is right, because they know that you're there, they like you, and they believe in what you're saying. And so they're sure as heck going to want to do business with you. That happened with me last year, where I had a city manager of a municipality up in Oklahoma reach out to me and say something along the lines of like, yeah, hey Ryan, saw your post around this, really like what you had to say. We're thinking about going out to RFP next year. Would love your thoughts on this topic. And then from there, it started a dialogue between me and the city manager, and that led to an opportunity for us to try to win their business.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'll echo that. It is a very crowded market, and AI is making it more noisy than it's ever been. Ryan, you and I are probably large recipients of this, but me with a marketing background, I will get 20 emails in a day that are cold prospecting emails at least. And I can tell you the program that they used, the triggers that they used,
Yeah.
and they all sound almost exactly the same. And it's their customization triggers, and those things. Even if I went and did it manually, I would still get lost in the noise. Even if I was trying to learn everything about Ryan and prospect into Ryan, and I went and looked on his LinkedIn and looked on his website and looked how long he'd been at Marsh McLennan and McGriff before that, and I bundled that up in an email that was really personalized, those AI triggers would get that completely lost in the noise. It would be, nope, that's available on my LinkedIn, that's available on my website. AI pulled that back for them, probably wrote the email. So it's getting noisier and noisier. So like you said, you have to stand out, and you have to take a stance that is relatable, that's trustable. And that's what I love about your posts on LinkedIn, Ryan, is that I've noticed it's never like, hey, we do this better than so-and-so. It's employers. If you're not doing this, you should be, right? It's educating to a point where it's a firm stance that they should be doing it, but it's also, if it's not with you, they're hopefully doing it with someone else, right? Because it's ultimately putting them in the right place. So I love that concept that you brought in. I love this question because there are a lot of producers just starting out that watch the show. If you could go back to day one in 2022 and give yourself a piece of advice when you were starting building your book, what would that be?
Well, so I have two components to this. So there's starting at that point in time, but really starting right out of college. The first piece is you need to learn how to network with people and start building a network of people that you're interested in having relationships with and interested in doing business with. And so start there. So my big problem was I worked for an insurance carrier, so I always called on brokers. So, that was who I was doing my relationship with. But yes, I should have been doing that. But at the same time, I should have been building relationships with accountants and with lawyers and with bankers and, all of those type of people. And I never did it. So first and foremost, just go grow your network one way or another. Even if it's just some type of young performers situation where you're meeting other people, but various industries and things like that. Build a network. And then to go back to your question, from a insurance consultant standpoint, I guess you could expand the scope of this a little bit, but you need to build a story that you resonate with. You need a story that you can go back to time and time again that you fully believe in, that you're willing to tell others. And that story, you also have to be willing to take bullets for that story.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to be willing to understand that you tell a story, and let's just say it's an employer, and that employer says, yeah, not interested. Okay, like that is, maybe it was the story, maybe it was something else, but you don't want to be working with employers that don't resonate with your story. I'm in the same boat where you just like, okay, revenue. We gotta build our book, which is true. Like you are on the clock to a certain degree as a producer. And then once you're off the clock from a validation standpoint, you're on the clock from okay, now I just took a massive pay cut because I validated. Now I got to grow my book business even more so I can, start making more and more money based upon my revenue that I bring in. But you have to be willing to live and die by your story, knowing that if that employer says no to you and is not interested in your story, they're probably not the best customer for you anyway, because why would you want to spin your wheels on a customer that doesn't believe in what you have to say or what you offer to them? And you can't perform your best for that customer if they're not willing to take your advice. So build your story, stand behind your story, and others will believe you if you tell that story. They might not agree with it. It doesn't mean you're going to get automatically the business if you tell a compelling story, but they will believe in you. Like I said, with your centers of influence, do they believe in what you have to say? Do they believe in you so much that they're willing to introduce you to other people because they want to look good for their customers? And so the most critical thing you can do right now, if you're young, start networking, but is to build a story. Number 2, that resonates with other people, that hopefully services as some type of positive impact on what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. Really, really great advice. This whole episode, Ryan, it's really fun because you're still in that phase of growing your book, right? It's not and you're growing your book now, right? It's not a reflection of, yeah, when I grew my book 15 years ago, or I'm hoping to grow my book. It's I'm right in the thick of it. We're doing all of these things real time. I'm still doing all of these things. So I love that. If anyone is watching this, they know my goal with this podcast is that any broker or agency owner or person in the industry that watches this, takes 45 minutes out of their day to watch this, I want them to walk away with something they can do tomorrow to grow their business. And you've offered a lot of that. So really, really appreciative of that. Where is the best place for people to find you, Ryan?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Ryan Wiggins, or go out to YouTube, Benefits Are Boring, and you can find us on there as well.
Okay. And we'll include those in the show notes. But again, appreciate your time. This has been another episode of Benefits Broker Boost. And remember, be better tomorrow than you were today.